Changing fast. Thanks for that, Jessica Lemazurier in the newsroom. 18 years on, the event that sparked the Rwandan genocide is still not a closed case. The plane carrying Rwanda's Hutu president, Juvenal Habyarimana, shot out of the sky in April 1994 on its approach to Kigali airport. Habyarimana was engaged at the time in a peace plan with Paul Kagame's Tutsi rebels. They would go on to take the capital, but not before the massacre of an estimated 800,000 Tutsis and moderate Hutus. On Tuesday, a major reversal. The Paris court investigating the fate of the 3 French crew members on board had come up with a new findings that show they've shown 2 lawyers that shift the blame from Kagame to extremist Hutus who wanted at the time no part of a peace deal. As we're going to see, it's not just the Rwandans who've been bitterly divided these past 18 years. We're going to review the circumstances of the shooting of the president's plane and also try to see through claims of political meddling on all sides. Did France simply fail to read the signals that a genocide was coming, or does its responsibility go further? And what are the lessons to be drawn? Today in the France 24 debate, a new look at the Rwandan genocide. And with us to talk about it, Bernard Manguin, lawyer who represents 7 Rwandans who are under investigation, based in Brussels. Thanks for being with us.
With pleasure.
Also with us, Gérard Prunier, someone who's followed this story from the outset, a fellow at the Atlantic Council and author of The Rwanda Crisis, History of a Genocide. Stephen Smith, at the time he was reporting for a French newspaper. Today he teaches African American Studies at Duke University. Thank you for being with us. And Linda Melvern, investigative journalist and author of A People Betrayed, The Role of the West in Rwanda's Genocide. She is in London. Thank you for being with us. And we want to thank our viewers for weighing in on the discussion on the France 24 Debate Facebook page and on Twitter, where our handle is @FrancoisF24. Let's begin with the circumstances and a map that shows what happened at Kigali Airport on April the 6th, 1994. Now, the president's Falcon 50 plane shot down by 2 Soviet-made ground-to-air missiles. Bernard Manguin, what do we learn in this new report that's different about what happened in that approach to Kigali Airport from the plane?
In fact, it's very simple. Since around 17 years, many people explained that the area where the missiles were coming from was Masaka. That area, that thesis was supported by Judge Bruguière.
What is Masaka?
Masaka is an area around 4 or 5 kilometers far from Kanambe camp. And
there's that military, Kanambe camp is the military camp which is adjacent to the airport.
Yeah, it's near Kigali. And in that area, some people say, because the area is controlled and was controlled by Rwanda's army of Habyarimana. There was a camp of the army of Habyarimana. There was an Interahamwe training place there.
That's the Hutu militias, the hardline.
It was a Hutu. I don't like that word. It was controlled by the people of Habyarimana, there, Masaka. But the thesis was there was an infiltration of a commando coming from the CND and arriving in some place in Masaka and shooting down the airplane. I can say you, the people who supported that thesis, you have a lot of them. You had a certain witness whose name is Ruzibiza, who brought a document, and his book was, his testimony was supported by 2 major people saying that they are experts, Mrs. Vidal, Mr. Gishawa. There was a book of a certain Mr. Payan,
a French investigative journalist,
apparently, saying that it was Ruzibiza who said the truth. And on that base, our clients...
So the claim of...
the thesis of Masaka area
was that it was the Tutsis who shot down the plane in order...
There with a commando. And on that base, it was alleged by Judge Bruguière in his report in
the
2006,
French investigative magistrate.
French investigative magistrate, supported by a lot of people, and on that base...
And the new report reverses that.
The new report reverses totally that, saying on pure factual elements that if you do the analysis of a flight, the manner that it was shut down, the noise of the missiles, it was impossible that it should come from massacre. And so 16 years of manipulation are now totally destroyed.
All right, Stephen Smith, you were reporting at the outset when Judge Bruguière brought out the hypothesis that it was the Kagame's people who could have been responsible. Could have been, I stress. What's your reaction to this new report?
I think it is important to acknowledge the factual content of the report, which basically says that considering 6 emplacements from which the missiles could have been shot, 2 were opposed as far as its interpretation goes to the authors of shooting the missiles. As it was just stated, massacre was also controlled by the government forces, but it makes quite some difference to consider massacre by comparison to the Presidential Guard's compound. Now we know, at least we have this strong hypothesis, it's basically grounded on the acoustic evidence that people had heard the missiles being fired from Kanombe, and we now have this report, important, that says that the missiles were shot from the Presidential Guard barracks. So that's a new element, but I think you have to be very careful. I was just listening in. You have to be very careful not to incriminate people who work on other hypotheses, deem that immediately as manipulation. No one would go around and incriminate now the judges or the experts as being manipulators. We have a new factual element, but you had other factual elements such as the provenance of the 2 missiles, the SAM-16. They have serial numbers which trace them back to the Russian army, and they were sold to the Ugandan army, and Uganda was the organic ally of the RPF. So you have very few hard evidence, but you have elements. They are sometimes contradictory, as it is here, and you have a lot of presumptive proof, people just making assumptions. It's really difficult to speculate in the shade of a genocide. So you have to clearly distinguish what we have as hard evidence, and we are very happy to have a new piece of hard evidence, which now needs to be confronted with other evidence. It's very difficult to interpret because is it more likely for rebels to infiltrate the Presidential Guard barracks? Yes, I would say. Is it very likely that the very Presidential Guard that is seen as the vanguard of the genocide would have amidst them people walking in with missiles and shooting down the presidential plane? It's not easy to envisage either. So this is an ongoing discussion. There is a milestone with the new factual evidence that we have to take into account, and without any prejudice and without deeming other people believing other hypotheses as being necessarily manipulators or working for whatever conspiracy, and just take that into account and work from there. This is an ongoing discussion.
Let's try to stick to the facts. Stephen Smith, I want to get back to Bernard Monguet on this, bring up an important point, which is these were ground-to-air missiles, Soviet-made, and people say it's only the Ugandan army who backed the now president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, who had those missiles. Does the report
This is fantastic to hear that now, when you have, I represent 7 people indicted. Those people were accused during many years.
And now, people were close to the president.
Quietly, some people say today, oh, you have to begin to examine it. You cannot go to interpretation. I'm sorry. I am here for people who were accused. And all the elements in the file are totally destroyed. Not only the factual elements, and I come back to that question. Concerning the missiles, Mr. Smith perhaps had to have some reflection about the manner that those kind of missiles are coming in Africa, because we as lawyers for defense, we can prove that SR-16, those kind of missiles, circulated in all Africa, that there were countries of transit coming from eastern part and going to Africa. My partner in France, Mr. Foster, worked in the file of Angola Goethe. He's able to give a lot of information about that.
Gérard Prunier, this issue of the ballistics, is it for you still a gray area?
No, but the conclusions are. Mr. Manguin is saying that because we have a different view of the ballistics, we have a different set of suspect people. I totally disagree. You know, now we know where the missiles were coming from. Who fired them? We have no notion. The notion that because they came from Kanombe instead of Masaka changes the burden of the proof is not serious. You know, and also another aspect, a lot of people seem to think that it's either the RPF or Hutu extremists. Well, the problem is that it might be both. And that the notion that there is a single guilty party, you know, we've had that problem with a lot of political murders. If you look at who killed Kennedy, and you begin to scratch into that, you find strange bedfellows. And I'm afraid, I wouldn't venture on giving an explanation, although I have my own idea about that, but I'm afraid that this is another case of strange bedfellows, that we might find people who are together who were not supposed to be together.
Linda Melvern, for you, there's no doubt that this is a game changer, this report.
Yes, absolutely, because it's the first time there has been really serious and thorough scientific work done on this, although there was a team from London, from the UK, which concluded that the missiles were fired from Kanombe. I'd like to take issue with Stephen Smith on this. His main source for the fact that the missiles were fired by the RPF comes from a man called Rusibisa. And Rusibisa was so certain of his own knowledge of this that he said that there were 2 people who fired the missiles, 2 security guards with them. They were in a white Toyota, and apparently they managed to access Kanombe camp and go near the cemetery in that camp in the presence of Belgian officers, in the presence of French officers, and somehow under cover of night also escape. I do think that we should look at the Bruguière report in other aspects. I was very concerned that in the Bruguière report, Rusibisa claimed that it was a network commando from the RPF that in fact assassinated a politician in Kigali on the 22nd of February 1994. This simply wasn't the case. Bruguière obviously hadn't found the UN police report, the Civpol report, which accused 2 former presidential guard who were arrested for that crime. So for Bruguière to claim that Gatabazi had also been killed by the RPF initially made me very suspicious of his inquiry.
So for you, who did it? Linda Melvern, for you, who did it then?
Well, for goodness sake, I have written more times than I care to remember the sentence, "We will never know who exactly fired the missiles." But it does, this latest scientific report calls into serious question the Bruguière report and this thesis, which is no more than a thesis, that the missiles were fired from Masaka. Could I also say that the theory that it was the RPF is used all the time by the génocidaires in the ICTR courtrooms.
Revisionist.
Yes, it is the cornerstone of their defence that the RPF fired the missiles at the president's plane and that the large numbers of Tutsi deaths afterwards were caused by spontaneous anger. Stephen Smith recently, I think sometime last year in March, I think it was, in the London Review of Books, called all this into question. And I find that really rather strange.
Stephen Smith?
First of all, I would like to oppose a rebuttal to the imputation that this is Ruzibiza. I don't ground what I said on Ruzibiza. The fact is, we trust the French justice on what came out yesterday, and I don't see why we wouldn't trust the French justice when it comes to establishing that there are serial numbers for 2 missiles and that there is remains of these missiles that are still in our hands. So we have factual evidence, and we don't need any eyewitnesses. I perfectly understand that eyewitnesses can be mistrusted, but this is just not fair to assume that anyone who is arguing against this being a decisive turnaround would necessarily be close to genocidaire and try to be a revisionist. This is not at all the case. We have to move forward with the elements that we have. I did write my piece in the London Review of Books, which I don't think is a revisionist newspaper, and I just voiced it gave all the elements and all the contradictory elements about an ongoing inquiry into what actually was at the origin of what is still a scar on the conscience of the international community, which is not to have followed up on the death of 2 sitting presidents who were shot down in a plane. And we all want to know who shot them down. I've never said this or that faction did it. I do agree with Gérard Prunier when he's very cautious about the authorship is still an open question. It is not because you know that it was not in a field, in a plane held by the government forces that the missiles were fired, that it was probably, to the best of our knowledge today, that the missiles were shot from the Presidential Guard's barracks. That doesn't settle the question of the authorship at all. It is an element, it has to be taken into account, but open-mindedly.
An element that has to be taken into account. When we come back in the France 24 debate, we're going to look also at how, over the past 18 years, this has all weighed on relations between France and Rwanda. Stay with us. The France 24 debate continues.